I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Welcome to the RANE Insights podcast from RANE Network. In this podcast episode, David Lawrence, co-founder of RANE, speaks with James R. Sisco about social listening and how it can be leveraged in corporate culture discussions. James is the founder and CEO of ENODO Global, and he draws upon an extensive military career in the U.S. Marine Corps Special Operations and Naval Intelligence to lead ENODO.
Jim, thanks for joining us, and it really is, I think, going to be a great conversation. And we'll get into your work in a moment, but I will note for the audience that Jim's had a distinguished career in the military and the intelligence community, and just, I think within the last week plus, returned from Iraq, where he was doing some very, very meaningful work, speaking engagements, and hopefully assisting in the restoration of a civil society in Iraq. So, Jim, I'll start with thank you for that and for your continued service.
Well, it's my pleasure, David, and happy to join you here today on the RANE Network and hopefully provide some valuable insights to your listeners on a very controversial topic these days.
Okay, and we're going to dive right into it. Jim is as in being the head of ENODO. I thought it'd be helpful for the audience just to hear maybe the 30 seconds of the company that you led. Obviously, this is something different from your military career, but not different from how you've thought about your efforts in terms of gaining insights and intelligence around what's happening in the world, but maybe a little bit of the history around ENODO and even the name.
Yeah, thanks, David. After my 23-year military career, 4 combat tours, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, Iraq, I saw a lot of the problems or challenges that not only our government faces, but the international community and understanding risk. So I formed ENODO, and the idea behind ENODO was to understand these challenges in a different way, in a different light, and kind of looking at this social risk. And a lot of that comes from the origins of our name, which is ENODO is Latin, it means to solve. And really what we're trying to do is solve some of these very complex issues or challenges that exist within our society and solving those through the eyes of the population and understanding the identities of individuals, groups, populations. And by doing so, I think we come up with some very unique ways of solving these problems.
And just sort of building on that, Jim, I've always thought of ENODO as a bit of an extension of your career in the military, i.e. Thinking about ways that information, data can be brought to the surface so more informed decisions could be made around a wide variety of efforts. And I've also watched as you've progressed with ENODO that, very often you are looking at some of the issues that divide us, trying to understand why that is and what people are actually saying. So I know you use the term social listening. I like the term. And maybe we'll just sort of jump into your most recent effort and a very interesting report on diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI, and social listening. And I know you've been very, very careful, obviously not to insert, as people often do, their own commentary, their own opinions, but just to get to, I think we were joking, sort of in Dragnet, the TV show-like fashion, the facts, just the facts. What are people saying? How are they feeling about this issue? So why don't I maybe just allow you to introduce the report, and then we can get into some of the specific insights that you were seeing in social media?
Yeah, I appreciate that. What I'll preface this conversation with is that these are not my opinions or my beliefs or my views. This isn't, ENODO Global isn't a typical consultancy where we tell you what we think based upon our years of experience. What we've done is we've created a platform that allows us to go out and understand what's being talked about, the conversations, how they're nuanced between different social media platforms, between different groups. We aggregate the data, and it goes way beyond just social media, looking at web scraping on Facebook. And we also incorporate some of our partners. We do our own individual surveys, and for this particular report, we did a business case study. So what happened was we saw how other movements like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, how they were impacting society. So we decided that we wanted to look at DEI, and we wanted to understand it at a deeper level. We want to understand what public perception was, what perceptions were in different social media platforms between different demographic groups, and try to really understand it to help business leaders make better informed decisions about their investments in DEI. So it wasn't just an analysis to understand, but really to inform and to help, like I said, business leaders make more informed decisions about their investments in either programs, initiatives, or things like that.
So that's a helpful overview. Can you share with us a little bit about how you went about trying to gauge the sentiment analysis, the social listening? What did you basically access? What platforms were important? What voices were you able to capture?
Sure. Like most of our social listening reports, what we do is we look at the broad spectrum of social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Reddit, Discord. We look at over 20 social media platforms in order to get a very broad cross section, good representation of the population, knowing that it's not always representative of everyone's beliefs and ideas, and sometimes very nuanced. Once we have that kind of baseline assessment to build from, then we look at other areas. Like we just completed an analysis strictly on LinkedIn, or we did our own Reddit surveys, or we accessed data from one of our partners, Trendency, to understand how these conversations, how sentiment is different, how it's nuanced. And we also are able to aggregate the data and then extract certain topics or issues, explore, individual discussions that resonate either positively or negatively within the data set. So it's a very sophisticated data analytics platform that uses AI and some other tools, topic modeling, natural language processing. We've even gotten to the point where we can insert memes and emojis and emoticons to measure sentiment. So the technology was originally designed for the intelligence community. We just brought it over to use in the private sector.
Okay, and something that may be important to our audience, my assumption, this is open source information, Jim, that you are looking at. This is the type of data that is available from these platforms.
Yeah, we're not doing anything, tapping into WhatsApp groups or anything nefarious. Any of the information, either the structured or unstructured data that we integrate into the data analytics platform, can be collected by anyone.
Okay, so tell me how long this took and just sort of the process, and I want to dive right into sort of what some of your findings were.
Sure. Well, once we came up with the idea, we built the data analytics platform, and it took us approximately 14 to 16 days to build the report. That's from the platform build to production. What we were able to do is we would go back in time for a 1 month period to gather the analysis. We have the ability to go back 6 months, which we usually do for reports. For this report, we wanted the most current information available. And then we can look historically to measure changes over time based upon specific events like Supreme Court rulings and things like that. But we wanted this to be very timely. So we looked at the past 30 days, January to December, for this particular report.
All right. And Jim, let's go over, you did a great executive summary, but look, when people are posting on these social platforms, often anonymously or under pseudonyms, obviously, maybe they're being more candid, maybe they're being more snarky, maybe they're being disingenuous, maybe, people are just, fooling around. But generally speaking, because I know you curate these messages, maybe you can go through the top line findings of your report.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think one of the findings that is not in the report that I think we should have included was the fact that there's certain differences in sentiment when you look at individual platforms on social media and you look at the general population as opposed to specific groups or individuals. We saw that in the general population in social media, people had shared more positive sentiment, had better, more favorable reactions than in some of the other social media platforms that were specifically designed to address, corporate individuals. And but I can talk about that. But there was a couple very interesting findings that I think everybody can identify, whether you support DEI or you don't. Number one, there was a lack of consistent measurable results. In other words, what we found is there's no universally accepted definition. And the objectives for DEI, they vary depending upon who you're talking to, whether you're talking to managers, whether you're talking about employees, and there's definitely significant differences in opinion between people who support DEI and opponents to it. So overall, DEI is a very well-intentioned concept. I mean, there's not a lot of people who think that DEI, in its application or in its idea and design is a bad thing. I mean, most people believe that it is a good concept, but the application and the implementation and the execution have failed. And from a business perspective, they don't really provide any significant return on investment. So the question or the hypothesis that we had going into this is, should we continue to make investments in DEI, whether it's personnel, programs, or initiatives, or should we refrain and find another way to try to come up with the objectives of DEI without making these expenditures? And then I'll start getting into the business case and everything that, and the findings that we found that support our hypothesis.
Okay. So just to recap a little bit, good idea and concept, but from what you were seeing, significant issues and concerns around what is being undertaken, its efficacy, its ROI, and also per our prior conversations ahead of the podcast, you were seeing issues that it might be making within some institutions, issues or problems worse than they already were. Is that a fair summation?
That is a very accurate, fair summation, and I'm glad that you brought the piece up that I neglected to include, which was that there is heightened tensions and feelings of negative feelings that have eroded the corporate culture within some organizations because they believe that DEI is being shoved down their throat. And those are some of the findings that also came out of the analysis.
Great. So why don't you take us through, specific things, and let me set up a tabletop exercise for you, Jim. If you were taking your report and advising a company or its board that either has undertaken certain DEI initiatives, has DEI objectives, or is thinking about undertaking that, what are you telling them they need to be sensitive to? What is it that you've actually heard out there as part of your social listening that the C-suite and board members should be aware of?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but one that I think we can address with the data analytics. The thing that I would tell these C-level executives is they really need to understand what the attitudes and perceptions and beliefs of their employees are before they make any decisions. And what we found in the overall sentiment analysis, there was a large majority, 62%, of negative perceptions towards DEI initiatives. Within the corporate environment, when we parsed out the data and we did an analysis looking at Reddit and Twitter and Instagram from corporate employees, we found that negative sentiment increased by 5%, and that there was only 16% positive sentiment towards DEI initiatives, which was 11% less than the overall sentiment for found in social media. Once we started looking at the data and we looked at what the conversations were, that one was very telling for me. So we looked at the negative conversations and wanted to understand, what people were talking about. And I think this would be very telling for the leadership within the organization. Out of all of the negative conversations, 47% of those dealt with implementation and leadership. So there was a huge part of those negative conversations that really thought the implementation of DEI failed because of the leadership. Poor communications, not able to clearly articulate what the benefits were. And then the other part was 18%, almost 20% of the conversations really expressed concerns about being marginalized within the organization, based upon race or gender. And there wasn't a lot of communications to address those concerns. So if I'm advising these C-level executives, what needs to happen is they need to clearly articulate what the idea behind the either program, training initiative is, and make sure the implementation is directed in a way that it doesn't strike upon the fears of marginalizing people with the intent. But the other thing that was really telling on this was when we looked at the positive discussions, the majority of the conversations, 51%, talked about the marketing and branding of DEI. It really didn't talk about empowering, segments of the workforce or race, gender, which is what DEI is all about, inclusiveness. And it really talked about marketing branding. And we pulled the thread on that, and maybe I'll get to it a little later, but when 51% of the positive conversations are just talking about the marketing aspects and communications and branding, I think that tells you that it really has evolved away from its original design and intent.
By the way, just on a note, maybe I should have begun here. Is there, in fact, were you seeing this in the social listening? Is there, in fact, a unified definition or commonly accepted definition of what DEI is?
No. We found that even just doing a Google search of DEI, there was so many different definitions. There was not a universal definition. And then when you looked across academia, industry, government, they all have different meanings, different definitions. There is no universal fundamental definition for DEI.
Okay. And in light of that, can you give the audience sort of a sense of the range of what people believe DEI is, recognizing, as you've already stated, Jim, there's sort of acceptance that the objective is noble and worthwhile, but it's been the execution. So I'm just trying to unpack a little bit that perhaps what has happened here is people have different conceptions of what DEI is, and then when it gets rolled out within corporations, or even more broadly, potentially to government agencies and stuff, that there is that disconnect and hence that disappointment. But what's sort of the range of what people think DEI is?
Well, that depends on whether you're a proponent of DEI or whether you're in opposition to it. So going back to, when we talk about the proponents of DEI, and what we found was that they really look at DEI from their own feelings, virtue signaling, how it relates to them. And a lot of those are because they have a vested interest in it, either from an emotional perspective or a financial perspective or an equity perspective, because maybe because of their race or their gender. And where opponents of DEI, they look at it from a totally different worldview. A lot of these people look at DEI as contradictory to their own values and beliefs or their worldviews, either religious or whatever. And what they're doing is they're reinforcing these negative perceptions based upon their personal experiences. Some of these people have been subjected to discriminatory or racist policies that DEI, although is supposed to eliminate, actually creates within an organization. And what we found in the analysis, there was hundreds of case studies and examples where discriminatory or racist policies were promoted unintentionally by DEI programs, and it created a lot of resentment. And one of the ones that we use as an example was an African American woman who was in a DEI leadership position who actually quit because she was perceived at being put in that position because of her race. I think the numbers reinforce that when we looked at the number of individuals and the demographic analysis of DEI managers where race and gender had a significant impact. 79% of the DEI managers were African American women. And that is not representative of the corporate workforce at all. As a matter of fact, 39% more female managers in DEI positions than the regular workforce managers. And there's only 2% of the DEI managers were white males, and only 3% were of Asian descent. So, like I said, I didn't want to come at this from a perspective of this is what I think. We used the data analytics to reinforce the findings. And one of the things that we found was that the DEI position itself being represented by African American women and less represented by the typical workforce created resentment and animosity.
Okay. So that's an insight. And what I'm hearing you say, Jim, is that basically the same issues that are capturing we'll call it the outside zeitgeist around divisiveness, but in the last year we've had the Supreme Court rule on affirmative action and the admissions policies of universities. We've seen other types of what I'll refer to as pushbacks around everything from advertising campaigns to you see states that are, I don't want to mix the two, but that have pushed back around asset management firms that have spoken about ESG. One of the most prominent, what I'll refer to as figures in the financial world, Larry Fink, no longer will use the term ESG because he's found it to be too much of a lightning rod. And what I'm hearing you say is that some of the same issues that have sort of occupied the public debate are now seeping inside companies and are being reflected in the social listening that you've been able to do.
Yeah, I would say that's an accurate assessment. What I also would like to kind of talk about, just like your dragnet thing, I phrase, just the facts. When we looked at the cost benefit analysis, we actually did a business case study to look at expenditures for large size companies. And we really wanted to know what the investment was and then what the return on that investment was. What we found was we assumed on large size companies, approximately, they spend around $3.5 million annually on DEI. And that's between average salary of a DEI manager around 102,000, three per company. And then we looked at the number of hours for training per employee on average salary. If we took how many 8 hours of DEI training annually per the salaries of these individuals, it comes out to about $89,000 a year. And that's, in companies obviously with higher salaries, DEI, you see greater training cost for that. But what we found was that there was significant cost associated with these DEI investments, and we were unable to come up with any measurable results that would either increase performance, workforce performance, optimize corporate culture within the organization, or increase efficiency within the organization. There were no measurable, tangible results that we could find anywhere. There's a lot of talk about, hey, it improved the corporate culture, but how do you measure that? And I think this coincides with a lot of what we've seen lately, where we saw in a couple of universities, and you and I talked about this. The University of Michigan allocated $15.6 million in 2021 for its DEI efforts, including 126 positions. And what's the return on investment? We have seen that recently, a lot of pushback and from universities in Florida and other places, and also corporate America, where DEI investments are being questioned.
So look, I'm familiar, as is the audience, with the notion that if you can't measure it, it's not progress. And there are a lot of intangibles, as you and I have discussed, that are packed up in this, about how people feel about the company they work for, the school they attend, the effort that's being made. There are issues about the ability to recruit new talent. There are issues about, are they retaining more people as a result? Is there a higher satisfaction in being employed at a company as a result of this? And all these things, obviously, Jim, as you've noted, we've noted in our prior conversation, very, very difficult to measure. But what I hear you saying is that the ROI, it's not so much that it doesn't exist, it's just that no one has really found a way to measure it and then demonstrate that they did measure it. Is that a fair summary of your findings?
Yeah, that's a fair summary. I would say I'm not here to poo on DEI. I believe there are some very valuable aspects and components of DEI. I just believe that, and I haven't found anything that is going to reinforce my beliefs that is measurable. as quantifiable. We can talk about, oh yeah, it's improving corporate culture or it's enhancing this, but nobody can measure it.
And look, there are a lot of factors that go into corporate culture. My experience, not just at Goldman, but working with Goldman's clients and many of the, and obviously since then, working with our client base, there can be all sorts of factors that go into corporate culture, and people have different definitions of what corporate culture is. What I would say that does matter to businesses is the ability of people to feel that they actually belong in their companies, and they have a place and they have a voice, that their rights are respected, their judgments are respected, they have a career path that they can understand, that they have the ability to have a certain degree of employment and financial security. I think recruitment, the ability to continue to recruit top talent and how people feel about the company is essential. The retention issues are essential. And then obviously the performance of the company, whether you're a public company or a private company, the performance of that company in terms of whatever their business is absolutely fundamental. And I can tell you that employees always feel better when their companies are doing well financially and they're rewarded for it. Covers a whole host of sins, but certainly what has come out is, as you look at recruitment practices, retention practices, advancement practices, et cetera, obviously there's a lot of work that has to be done throughout society, but no less inside companies. But I think there are many people who want to get it right, and the thing that I was taken aback by your study was really what the sentiment reaction was to DEI. And I thought, because of the social listening, you were able to quantify what some of the issues are and certainly what companies have to be thinking about when they're initiating a program like this. I'll sort of ask you if you were going to list the top 3 or 4 challenges that DEI has in, demonstrating efficacy and demonstrating that, there are tangible improvements. What would those be?
Yeah. So, David, I agree. There is obviously a need for a good corporate culture within the organization. I learned that, from my time in special forces, in the military, and in the corporate environment. I always go back to the story where John F. Kennedy was touring NASA during the space race, and he was walking down the hall and he ran into a janitor, and he goes, he asked the janitor, "So what do you do here?" And the janitor looked at him and said, "I'm here to put a man on the moon." And within NASA at that time, everybody thought that their mission was to put a man on the moon, including a janitor. So, do I think that DEI programs, initiative, and training really help the corporate culture? No, which goes into the 3 challenges, the greatest challenges that I see and were revealed through the analysis. The first one being overcoming the challenge, or the stigma of DEI. Since we have such a large amount of negative public perception, trying to overcome just the ideas and the stigma of DEI within the organization is going to be probably the greatest challenge that an organization faces. The second greatest challenge within the organization is actually the implementation of it. Is it going to be training? Is it going to be programs? Is it initiatives? Is it a hiring process? Is it the retention process? An organization really needs to understand within their organization how they want to structure, implement, execute DEI, and across what spectrum. And those are going to be the greatest challenges. And then the third one is coming up with quantifiable, measurable matrices in order to understand how it is impacting their company from a performance, efficiency, and ROI perspective. If they can do those things, I would imagine that it would be successful. And then kind of a gratuitous self promotion. ENODO came up with its own training curriculum, and we call it social awareness training instead of DEI, because we wanted to get away from the entire branding of DEI and the negative connotations. So we developed 3 different courses in curriculum and training based upon our social risk analysis that we originally taught and partnered with TEACS, which is a University of Texas. We modified that to come up with our social awareness training that can help companies understand the challenges they face when they're trying to implement DEI objectives across their organization.
So I was having trouble on mute. So Jim, first of all, great conversation. I'll take it away that maybe the term DEI has now become so controversial, so toxic, that they have a branding issue, okay? And the underlying objectives, laudable. People have to think about how best to make progress in those areas. As you were speaking, by the way, I was reminded, I know you and I chatted about this, but Ross Perot, during his, he had 2 presidential runs, and I remember in the first debate, he's on the stage with Bush Sr. and President Clinton, and he's asked a question about his company, Perot Systems, which employed several thousand employees, and just about the work standards and equality, and generally people were not using the words diversity, but they were using words such as labor practices and fairness and stuff. And he gave an interesting, I thought a very interesting answer. Whether it came to pass in his company, I don't know. But he explained that his standard was one in which, and he claimed it was in the handbook, and he claimed that every employee coming into Perot Systems was informed about it, was that their job was to make Perot Systems, beyond being successful, the kind of company that they would have no problem having their loved ones, wives, husbands, children, work for. That it would be the kind of place that you would want to have your loved ones work for. And I thought that was maybe imprecise. It doesn't meet EEOC guidelines, but I thought it was a reasonable recitation, a little bit of the golden rule, as they say. So in any event, this has been very, very insightful. Companies continue to try to find the right way to advance important principles of governance and fairness. And obviously, it's a process, Jim, as we've spoken about. A couple steps forwards and maybe, a step back. And obviously something that's very, very controversial, and something that's reflective of the broader issues that are being debated today. But again, we'll be posting your study on social listening. I think it's important, as people are shaping or reshaping their programs, to be aware of some of the commentary that has appeared through the leading social media platforms and what people are thinking and what they're saying. And I'll also take away, Jim, the point about measuring progress is not simply a business school or business consulting exercise. People want to know that the things that are going on in their company actually are making a difference, and a positive one. So it's reinforcing for employees, reinforcing for all stakeholders, whether they're shareholders or customers or vendors or whatever. So again, thanks for your continued work, and look forward to sort of further discussions in this important area.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and I hope that the subscribers to the RANE Network and everyone else can, draw from our analysis some insights that will help them in either their employment roles or their decision-making roles within their organizations. I think we agree that at the end of the day, it really is about optimizing the corporate culture, optimizing performance, and increasing the return on investment for anything they're doing.
So, Jim, thanks, and obviously we'll be connecting clients as they come in with their inquiries. So thanks again for the time.
No worries. Have a great rest of the day, David.
This is the RANE Insights podcast, which is part of the RANE Insights series comprised of both virtual and real-world events, offering unique practical perspectives from RANE's leading experts in risk management. To learn more, please visit us at ranenetwork.com. That is RANE network.com. Thanks for listening.